Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to BLITZKRIEG, our own strategic affairs show. Pakistan is in a state of absolute turmoil. It seems that the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, that entire forge of the TLP has entered Gujranwala. That is what the reports are coming in right now, and it looks very dangerous. Pakistan's government is down on its knees. Earlier they said that this is akin to a militant/terror organization, and they would be treated as such. And just 48 hours before that, they freed 350 workers of the Tehreek-e-Labbaik. Lahore is looking like a war-ravaged city. And the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan makes its way, slowly but surely, to Islamabad's diplomatic enclave. I have Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow of the Observer Research Foundation. Sushant, a very warm welcome. Before I proceed further, I'd like to ask you, Sushant, what's happening? There have been videos of their interior minister of Pakistan, of 2017, Sheikh Rashid, saying that aag laga denge, maar denge. That time he was in the opposition and he wanted to get even with Nawaz Sharif. And now the same person is saying that, he was on the side of the Labbaik people then. And today he's saying that ye Kaladan Tanzeem hai, and these are blacklisted organizations, and they took out AK-47s and shot up a couple of cops in Lahore, and they're moving towards Islamabad. What in God's name is going on, Sushant? What's happening in Pakistan?
Well, I think it's the chickens coming home to roost. These were organizations which had been created or which had been sponsored, which had been spawned by not only political parties to counter their rivals, but also by the deep state and the establishment in Pakistan. The Barelvi movement has been in the offing for a number of decades. Only it gathered a certain amount of critical mass after the formation of the Tehreek-e-Labbaik, the TLP. And now these guys are asserting themselves on the streets. The point is that it could not be that till 2 years back or 3 years back, they were perfectly kosher because they suited your objectives or your political objectives. And today, because now they actually challenge your political authority, they are not suitable anymore. Number one. Number two, it's the hypocrisy of the Pakistani elite which is being called to question. These are the same people. You will hear them ad nauseum, say stuff like, for the Prophet, I'm ready to sacrifice my life, my children's life, my property, my family, everything. And then in the very next breath, they say, but we cannot afford to sever connections with France. Why? Isn't that hypocritical? If your love for the Prophet is so much, then why not sever connections with France or any other country, which endorses the cartoons, etc. Now, I know the reason why the Pakistanis don't want to do it, but what TLP is doing is actually exposing the hypocrisy. Third, Gaurav, this is the rise of the underclass. These are not people who are desperados, or these are not jihadists, these are not a radical element. These are guys who live next door to you and me. This is your everyday plumber, electrician, carpenter. These are those kind of guys, the so-called underclass of society, which is rising up because they have found an issue which is very dear to their heart. And finally, the TLP has very successfully weaponized some very emotional issues, and they brought people to the ground, and the movement has grown from strength to strength. And even this latest fracas which is going on as we speak, and I believe they have now moved out of Gujranwala. They are probably on the verge of entering Wazirabad, where the red line has been drawn by the Pakistan Rangers. It's going to be a test for the Pakistani state. If they fire on this crowd, they will be held to pay. If they compromise with this crowd, there will be repercussions going forward. So I don't see any real good coming out of this particular agitation. But like I said in the beginning, chickens coming home to roost.
Sushant, tell me something which I have been sort of, and I would like you to build on this thing that I've been thinking about, my analysis. That the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan finds a lot of resonance within the people who also support the Pakistani Taliban, who have the Afghan Taliban mindset, extremist Islam mindset. Any action, and I'm sort of giving a reference to the Lal Masjid action that happened in Pakistan. Anything which happens to the Labak, let us say they start firing because they've called out Rangers for 60 days, handed over pretty much Punjab to the Punjab Rangers. Now, do you think there could be a lashback? There could be serious repercussions if it comes down to violence. Wazirabad, red line. What happens if they cross the red line? I'd like you to amplify.
So Gaurav, I don't agree that these are people who have a resonance with the Taliban or the other jihadist element. These guys are not jihadists. You can call them fanatics, but they are not jihadists. These are not guys who have weapons training. These are not guys, who have been trained terrorists. No, they are not. So I think that is a big difference between them and the Taliban type element, number one. Number two, I think there is a very deep ideological and doctrinal difference between those who are the jihadists from the Deobandi and the LA school and these guys who are the Barelvi sect. Of course, they're all fanatical in their own way, but there is that theological and doctrinal difference, which means that these guys are not going to go the TTP way. Having said that, I think the repercussions are going to be precisely what you are anticipating, right now. That if there is any kind of firing, any kind of violence on these people, it will only add fuel to the fire. And I think the Pakistan army realizes it. I think the government realizes it. Look, the point is you might be able to stop this particular march from entering Islamabad. Sure, you might be able to do it. You fire, you kill 8, 10, 20 people. States can do it and get away with it. But the repercussions are going to be there. Number one, I think there will be an immediate political repercussion on the Imran Khan government. And Imran Khan has tried to be too clever by half because he has given the security responsibilities to the Rangers, which is basically a paramilitary organization led by the Pakistan army. If the Rangers were to fire, the impact comes on the army, and the army is somewhat leery of getting into that kind of a state where the public, especially from Punjab, starts blaming the army for firing on defenseless or unarmed civilians. I think the army would like to avoid it. The Imran government does not want to use the Punjab police, which is under it, because they feel that if the Punjab police was to resort to this kind of a crackdown, then the entire impact is going to come on Imran Khan. Now, at one level, this tells you that that single page narrative which was going on for the last 3 years has now been torn into pieces. Right. So one is that impact. But I think the larger impact is going to be that many of these guys who haven't picked up arms as yet, the TLP does not really have an armed wing, could actually resort to something like that. Maybe they could resort to, for example, in the last agitation they've carried out, they targeted Sheikh Rashid's house. Now, Sheikh Rashid, he's a pocket-sized Hitler who tries to act, who's very voluble and tries to act like he's some kind of a major jihadist kind of a figure. But, he's a coward at the end of the day. Look at the kind of flip-flops the man who's in charge of the Interior Ministry in Pakistan has made over the last week, 10 days. And that tells you which way this thing is going.
Sushant, this whole Lal Masjid thing, when it happened, it's only after Lal Masjid that the attack on Musharraf happened.
What happened after Lal Masjid was that the TTP came into being. That all these disparate local Taliban groups all came under the umbrella of the TTP. And then from around 2007, when the TTP was formed, till around 2014, when the Pakistanis got back a modicum of control over the areas where TTP was dominant, I think those 7 years were virtual hell for Pakistanis because of the kind of attacks that the TTP had launched. But the Musharraf attacks happened because of
Sushant, one thing. Sushant, basically what I was trying to say was that I'm not saying that the TTP was or the Tehreek-e-Labbaik was responsible for the attack on Musharraf. No. My point is that after the Lal Masjid, there were 3-4 attacks on Musharraf's life in total. And one of the attacks was after the Lal Masjid. And there are people who say Now, there is no proof that whether it's a direct result of the Lal Masjid attack, but there are people who say that it upset a lot of people within the Pakistan military. So my analogy here is that you were right when you said that the Rangers are led by Pakistan Army, and should the Rangers fire on these protesters, there will be a lashback in Punjab against the Pakistan Army, because Rangers and Pakistan Army is, literally the same. Ek hi log hain. They are officered by the Pakistan Army. So the question that I'm going to ask you is, you're saying that inside the Pakistani establishment, inside the Pakistani deep state, there is this capability of having a switch on, switch off in terms of organizations like the Labak or even Maulana Fazlur Rahman types of characters, where getting 1 million men on the road is easy for them. It's not very difficult for them. While they may not hold very high political offices, they might not sweep elections, but these people can actually put people on the ground and block cities. My question to you is, you see, how do you see this thing unfolding? I want you to crystal gaze, because the things there are extremely serious. Forget about their diplomatic situation. Forget about their economic situation. This Labak thing is going absolutely out of control. What happens if they reach Islamabad? What happens if they cross Wazirabad? What happens if they reach Islamabad? I want you to crystal gaze, Sushant.
Gaurav, one is on that switch on, switch off kind of a thing. Yes, they can switch on and switch off until the switch stops working, which is very often what happens in situations like this, that you create an organization like this. Up to a point, you are able to exercise control. You can turn on the tap and turn off the tap, and then the valve fails, and then the tap keeps flowing. And then you have hell on your hands trying to stem the flow. So something similar has happened in the case of Tehreek-e-Labbaik. Number one. Number two, on the crystal ball gazing, I think it's a pretty scary situation. So one is going to be the immediate impact on the government, the stability of the government, on the civil-military relations. But if this mob, for example, if you stop it at Wazirabad, which is one of the red lines they have drawn, or you stop it before it enters Islamabad, then it depends. Are they going to be, keep doing a dharna out there? How do you get rid of them? Either you compromise with them, you give in to some of their demands, and you send them back home, which means it's a victory for these guys. And the next time they come, there will be even a bigger crowd, okay, and much more unmanageable. So that is one impact. The second impact is that you fire on them. If you fire on them, I don't see how the government can survive after that. There will be repercussions. Look, normally you've had the TLP cadre carry out attacks on people like on Nawaz Sharif, on people like the former foreign minister, the former interior minister Ehsan Iqbal and Khwaja Asif. Ehsan Iqbal, there was a shot fired at him. He barely escaped with his life. These were lone wolf attacks by people who had their allegiance to the TLP. The TLP incidentally came out of the movement or the protest against the hanging of Mumtaz Qadri, who took it upon himself to revenge what he thought was blasphemy committed by this fellow Salman Taseer. So you can see a continuum in how these attacks have unfolded. So going forward, if you crush these people, then you will have impact. You will have the impact of individuals being targeted. On the other hand, if you allow these people to enter, then who knows what the mob will do?
Absolutely.
I think the Pakistan Army will not allow this mob to enter. Will try and convince them not to enter, because if Islamabad burns, then the Pakistan Army also gets involved. So I don't think that will happen. But it's not going to be good for whatever.
Sushant, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Sushant. Time for a we have Sushant Sareen with us. And Sushant, I'll take this further with you. It's time to wrap up the program. A quick one or two questions. Who holds the button in Pakistan, this switch on, switch off thing? Because I keep on coming back to this point time and again. A lot of Pakistanis have said it does not matter. But it seems to me, and I can't get it out of my head, Sushant, that this is also, in a small part, if not majorly, a blowback from General Bajwa getting a 3-year extension. Somebody in the army hierarchy is not happy. Somebody is doing it. Because how can you have, Sushant, such a huge gathering in Pakistan, millions of people on the road, without the blessings of someone? I mean, is there a fissure between the Pakistan army? Is there a crack inside the Pakistan army, Sushant?
Look, there are problems within the Pakistan army, not so much after Bajwa's extension, but in the way things have been proceeding, especially with Faiz Hamid and stuff like that. So yeah, there are reasons for some of the senior officials to have problems with what is happening. But I am a little skeptical on whether somebody within look, the army as an institution could have winged and nudged the TLP to go on the war path this particular time. Because if you look at, it looks like too much of a coincidence. The fact that on the 6th of October, the spat over the promotions and the transfers start between the civil and the military in Pakistan, and around the 18th or 19th, the TLP announces its movement. Now, either you can say this is a pure coincidence, but given the past history of the TLP, one would be a little skeptical. Now, if that was somebody has put the TLP to it, then it has to be somebody within the army. But it could not happen without the knowledge of the army chief. I think we have to recognize that until now, at least, the Pakistan army chief remains the boss. People could grumble about him. People could, have issues with him. But I don't think anybody will be that brave as to conspire against him. And the moment somebody is that brave or that stupid, they get caught out and they get taken out. And I can give you half a dozen examples of that happening. So I'm not so sure whether this reflects the divisions within the Pakistan army. But yes, regardless of whether the Pakistan army put these guys to it or not, I think neither the Pakistan army is going to come out of this looking good, nor the government. I would be surprised if the government was to survive for very long after the denouement of this particular episode. And the Pakistan, the nation also is not going to come out of it smelling of roses.
All right, Sushant. So my last question to you, I'm absolutely running out of time. Last question, Sushant. A lot of people, a lot of commentators in Pakistan say that the relationship between Imran Khan and General Bajwa is irrevocably broken. It cannot be mended. It cannot be mended. It's gone out of the window. It's only a matter of time. Can you please expand on this?
No, I agree. I think that relationship is gone, and there are all sorts of stories and rumors coming out of Islamabad right now on how badly broken this relationship is. The thing is that if the army does not support this government anymore, does not provide the bulwark which has sustained this government, then I think it's going to be curtains, because Imran Khan is hanging on to power by a thread. He doesn't have too much support even within his own party, and if the army is simply pulling out support, I don't see how this government can survive for any length of time. There are just too many problems coming its way. There's likely to be a new wave of inflation coming in, very strong conditionalities coming from the IMF. The economy is in a complete mess. The politics is completely polarized. The army has pulled out support. So it's not something which is looking good for them. And clearly, every time the civilian stream starts getting into a scrap with the military, the military comes out on top, even if it might have a few setbacks initially. Ultimately, it comes out on top. The civilian government will find it difficult to survive without the military support, because the military can, pull a lot of tricks out of its hat to make life extremely uncomfortable for the civilian government. And I think we seem to be headed in that direction going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sushant, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan very positively on a rampage. They have entered Gujranwala, and people say they have crossed Gujranwala going up to Wazirabad. Wazirabad is the place where the government has said this is the red line, thus far and no further. If you cross Wazirabad, there will be a price to pay. But there is a dichotomy in what Pakistan speaks about and what Pakistan says and does. They said that the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan is an extremist militant outfit, and yet they freed 350 members of the Labbaik within 48 hours of having said that. Let us see how this unfolds. But whatever happens, it's not going to happen in the parliament. It's not going to happen in GHQ Rawalpindi. Ladies and gentlemen, this game is being played out on the streets of Pakistan. Thank you for joining us on Blitzkrieg. From here in the studios, from my team and I, Jai Hind.